Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Big reports going around today as to exactly what's going on with next year's Racing Bulls car, currently known as the AlphaTauri. Rumours have it they will take as much as they possibly can within reason from the Red Bull and try and create effectively an RB19 version 2.0. The starting point will be the front suspension. They're going to take everything they possibly can from the RB19 and from what Red Bull are currently working on to next year's car. How competitive is this Racing Bulls machine going to be? Is it going to be a pink Mercedes 2.0? Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. First of all, just very quickly on this trophy saga, rumor has it that the guy who had the trophy has now either, well, he's given it back it seems, or he's had it forcibly taken from him. I don't know, but John Noble here says that Hamilton's P2 trophy is back in the right hands of the FIA and is now on its way to Mercedes. So we'll see if they ever find that trophy ever again. There was also this from Alpine, David Brivio, who's I think come from MotoGP possibly, and I think he might be going back there. But he joined as racing director at Alpine in 2021, confirmed just a few minutes ago here that he's now leaving the team at the end of the year and was recently the director of racing expansion projects. So I don't know really how crucial this guy was to the operations at Alpine, but another sign, let's say, that things at Alpine are definitely changing rather dramatically. Quickly from race fans as well, they've come out with their rankings of drivers. They started with De Vries, 22nd. So the driver we're going to mention in 20th was not last place, but not far behind. So De Vries the worst, which is probably fair enough. We'll talk about this AlphaTauri here in a couple of minutes. Sargent gets 21st. You could argue that Sargent was better than maybe a couple of other drivers, but I think it's quite hard to argue, really. He did get bodied in qualifying by Albon 22-0. He didn't, as far as I'm concerned, really dramatically improve towards the end of the year. The crash in Suzuka, as well as you can see, was not a particularly good one. Not like there are good crashes, but you know what I mean. So Sargent 21st, he'll have to improve dramatically next year, or there's really no way that he stays in that car. But 20th, according to race fans, goes to Sergio Perez of Red Bull, second in the championship. 2 race victories, but 20th place. And I was thinking this is harsh, and I think it might still be a little bit harsh, but I can't really think of that many drivers I'd put him above. Maybe you could put him above Zhou. Maybe you could put him above Magnussen. Maybe you could put him above Stroll. But outside of that, I'm struggling to find too many drivers that you can realistically put Perez above on the season that he has. I don't think it's like the first few races were fine, but after that, there was that period. Monaco was bad. Miami, of course, was bad, really. Okay, he didn't crash in Miami. But then was that period of races. Like Singapore was obviously not great at all, like crashing cars out the way left, right, and center. Suzuka was the same. This was the crash, of course, in Hungary, right? This is, I'm pretty sure what that image is from. And then Qatar, even after all of that stuff, Perez said was the worst weekend of his entire career. Like, it was a shambles. The sprint race, the main race, both an absolute disaster. As I say, Suzuka was also terrible. So there was that stint of races where he was pushing too hard, like the racecraft was non-existent and wasn't delivering points either. And his qualifying, he averaged, what, 9th in qualifying this year. So he's definitely got to be in the lower half. 20th on paper feels harsh, but as I say, I don't know there's that many drivers I'd actually put him ahead of. So race fans have gone 20th, which is quite the statement for sure. But let's be honest, you look at the race win figure since 2022, Verstappen's got 34, Perez has 4. And even in terms of podiums, of those 34 wins, he's only had 38 podiums max. So his win rate when he's on the podium is mega. Perez has had only 20 podiums. So I think really, I mean, sure, you can kind of accept that Verstappen's got 34 wins in the last 2 years. Perez has 4 as just driver differential. But Perez has to have at least 30 podiums, you know, if those numbers are going to be valid. He's only got 20, barely more than Leclerc, not many more than Hamilton, then Sainz, then Russell, and then we've got plenty of others. And even Ocon and Gasly this year, both somehow on the podium. And even Lando Norris, who had a great end to the season, very confident he reckons that, you know, they'd have been P2 in the constructors and the drivers if the season started with the car they had from halfway through the year, you could argue. Now, of course, that's not the reality. They finished further down because they started with a tractor, but they got there. And if the form that Norris had at the end of the season was maintained, you know, there was no way Perez was P2 in this year's championship, despite just about hanging on, and I think was lucky to do so, given the mighty competition there was for the second place in this year's championship, right, between Aston Martin, McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari. The only reason why Perez was P2 was because they were all taking points of each other. And even as Perez said, I've already finished second, I'm now looking to go one better next year. So you can argue, like, has Perez learned his lesson? Does he really know what he's getting himself in for? Does he really believe that just because he finished second this year, that means he can go one better? Like, saying you finished second and therefore you can finish first next year fails to really consider the absolutely monstrous points differential and the performance differential between the two Red Bull drivers this year. But we will see. And of course, if Perez is ousted from Red Bull, as he is going to be at some point, the question is it the middle of this upcoming season or is it at the end of this upcoming season? That's the question to me at the very least. Where's he going to go? Does he go down to AlphaTauri? Because AlphaTauri have said they are no longer a junior team. They're not intending necessarily to always have junior drivers coming through. But at the same time, Tsunoda's been around for a few years now. He's a junior, I guess. But if Ricciardo was to come into Red Bull and Perez was going to be gone, I think it's Lawson that comes into that AlphaTauri seat rather than Perez going the other way. Not sure that makes much sense when he's had his stint at Red Bull, if that was to be the case. Time will only tell what actually happens here, but the AlphaTauri might be particularly competitive. Mercedes have been very confident in their car, it seems, over the last few days. We've heard comments from Hamilton, from Toto Wolff, about the competitiveness in the simulator and the testing. Did a couple of videos on those a couple of days ago. But how competitive they are depends on the relative strength of the opposition. And this is the concern that teams have about this car, the AlphaTauri. Of course, known currently as the AlphaTauri. Next year, that will not be the case. It's going to be known as the Cash App Racing Bulls Visa Race. I don't know what it's going to be. It's something like that. It's going to be Racing Bulls, and then they're going to have a couple of title sponsors, kind of like Aston Martin, Cognizant, whatever they got. It's the same type of deal, I'm pretty sure. So Racing Bulls is going to be I can't believe they're actually going with it. It's so bad, but whatever, maybe it'll catch on. It's also confusing because Red Bull is RB, and Racing Bulls is RB. So it's like the RB19... Is that just the Racing Bulls 19B? I don't know. That's apparently what they're planning. So, announcement on this indicated that it's going to be coming relatively soon. But in addition to this, the Racing Bulls, shall we call them team, will be more separate in some respects from Red Bull, but will be closer in other respects. Oliver Mintzlaff actually will limit Helmut Marko, and Christian Horner's influence on the sporting and technical side. The team will receive more high-priority investments. There's no plan to leave Faenza as Scuderia AlphaTauri, so I'm guessing Scuderia Cash App, Racing Bull, whatever it's going to be. We'll see. That's going to stay for the time being, but the relationship between the top Red Bull guys and what happens at AlphaTauri Racing Bulls is potentially going to be more limited, but at the same time, the car is going to be closer defined to the Red Bull. And this makes sense, but the opposition is somewhat concerned about how this might potentially be done. So there's been lots of theories ever since the Red Bull was incredibly good, and ever since rumours were coming out quite some time ago now that Racing Bulls were going to take everything they can from Red Bull. This has been the rumour. Now, Giuliano De Chessa here says today with Formula Uno that the new 2024 car will be equipped with the Red Bull pull rod front suspension. Now, it depends how much of a massive deal this is, in the sense that probably every car next year is going to have a pull rod style front suspension, because that's what Red Bull have, that's what McLaren now have as well. And all the teams know that the suspension is a very important part of why those cars have been very good for the second half of the season, and in Red Bull's case, for the last couple of seasons. So I would imagine that like every team turns up next year with a Red Bull imitation suspension, because I don't know if you can really improve too much on the RB19 suspension. So the other teams will try and copy it or improve in their own ways. Red Bull will maybe take a step forward, and the AlphaTauri will have last year's Red Bulls one in this car. So this is how it tends to go, is that last year's parts can be sold and acquired by other teams. AlphaTauri owned by Red Bull, they can do exactly that. And how much can you improve on the RB19's front suspension? Who knows? But the AlphaTauri will literally have it for next year's car. And this is the concern that other teams have as to the amount of next year's AlphaTauri Racing Bulls, which is going to be this current year's Red Bull, or even some items where possible of next year's Red Bull. So they go on to say that the Racing Bulls car will have a slightly lower front centre of gravity and a significantly revised chassis. It'll be fitted with new steering columns to accommodate the new suspension layout. The lower front section would also have a keel shape, just like the RB19. So this year, the cars were quite different, actually. We can see here that this is towards the early part of the season. I guess they're on a banking here at maybe maybe this is, well, it looks like they're on a banking potentially at Zandvoort or something, but at some part of the season, they were relatively different. This angle, I think, actually shows it quite well of the differences, even in like how far back the cockpit is. You guys can see here, at least in terms of the side pods, how far back they are on the Red Bull compared to the AlphaTauri, and even the front and rear suspension is quite considerably different at this point in the season. For the last 2 years, the AlphaTauri was pretty good a couple of years ago, 2021, but the last 2 years, since the ground effect era comes into play, AlphaTauri have basically done their own thing, Red Bull have done their own thing, and Helmut Marko and Christian Horner are sitting there thinking like, you know, we sell these guys stuff, they're better be our second team, sister team, and they're rolling around in the back of the field. Like, for a decent portion of this season, they were the worst car really on the grid. They got good at the ends, and Yuki and Danny started to deliver some serious points. And same with Liam Lawson, of course, doing a good job when he came in. So next year, this is the amount of things that they could potentially buy. It's been known that they will try and take as much as they can from Red Bull within reason. Some things they will still keep to themselves, but this is the list. So this is on race.com. I'll link it down below. This is what's known as the transferable components. So there's some lists you've got to do yourself, but all of these things you can buy if you want to. And Haas basically buy as much of this as they possibly can from Ferrari because it's the most cost-effective way to do it. But if you're AlphaTauri, and you're a Red Bull customer, and you buy their engine as well, and you buy their clutch and gearbox and whatever, then why not buy everything you can? So the rear impact structure, the gearbox, the clutch, the front suspension, the front upright assembly, the front axles, the rear suspension, the rear axles, you know, front and rear suspension you can buy, the steering stuff, the hydraulic stuff, all of this stuff you can buy. So if they want to, they can, and they can use as much as they can from the Red Bull car onto next year's car, which is when there's been a lot of theories as to how good next year's Racing Bull is going to be. Is it going to be the RB19, but it's actually the Racing Bull's 19 rather than the Red Bull 19? Are we going to turn up next season and there'll be 2 RB20s and 2 RB19s at the front of the grid? One of them, you know, the RB20 will be painted in a Red Bull livery, the RB19s will be painted in, you know, an AlphaTauri livery or Racing Bull's livery, whatever it's going to look like next season. Rumour has it it's going to be silver and blue or something to go with what the sponsors want, potentially Visa. I don't know. We'll see about that over time. But how good, you know, are we going to turn up to Bahrain and it's Verstappen, Perez, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, or the other way around? I don't know. Is that going to be the top 4? Like, how competitive is this car going to be? Because the other teams, try as they might to catch up to Red Bull, the fact that AlphaTauri can literally buy those components is presumably going to make next year's AlphaTauri a particularly competitive piece of machinery. Now, Christian Horner said the other day, this isn't going to be a pink Mercedes Racing Point's car, although Racing Point and Racing Bulls maybe are too dissimilar in their team names. Of course, there were some problems with that, and AlphaTauri want to avoid certain possibilities such as that as well. But Toto Wolff has also clarified over the other day that the FIA and Formula One need to ensure there is transparency over that relationship. So they can sell the parts, and that's fine, and that's in the rules. And Mercedes also sells some parts to Williams. They sell some parts to Aston Martin. Not everything, and there's certain things that those teams change. It's not anywhere near as close of a relationship as Haas and Ferrari have, for example, with all the stuff they buy from Ferrari, and potentially not anywhere near as close as what Racing Bulls are going to buy from Red Bull for the upcoming season. So CEO Peter Bayer has confirmed that basically every transferable component it can take from the RB19 they are going to take, which is a bit concerning for the other teams. And then the additional concern is that, well, are you sure, Mr. FIA man, that Red Bull's intelligence or investigations or research into the way these cars is designed, are those getting to Faenza, to AlphaTauri, or are they not? And, you know, is there some guy taking a trip over there to say hello, and then he mentions something? These are the things that the FIA say they try to police, but they also say that they can't really. Like, they can't really track everyone's movements all of the time and tell exactly what's going on. So Red Bull can say, no, we don't do anything of the sort, but we've heard Zach Brown say, we've seen Toto Wolff say that, you know, they want to ensure that the FIA investigate this to ensure that there's nothing untoward between the two parties. Because you can guarantee that if Racing Bulls turn up next season with a car that's good enough for second in the championship, there will be questions asked. As to, firstly, I suppose, whether they should be allowed to buy as much as they can from Red Bull from the RB19, or secondarily, whether there's something else going on as to how they've managed to build such a great car in addition around those other things. So, I think that the Racing Bulls car, however it turns out next year, is going to be pretty good. Because at the end of the season, the AlphaTauri was probably the 5th best car. I don't know what you guys think about that. It was definitely up there, right? I mean, the end of the year, of course, you have the Red Bull. The Ferrari in the hands of Leclerc was probably, right up there with the McLaren. The Mercedes was arguably on average at the 4th best, really. Then I guess you'd say in the Aston Martin, then the Alpine. But the AlphaTauri at the end of the year, especially look, what Ricciardo did in Mexico, what Tsunoda did a couple of times as well. That car was 6th, 5th fastest car, I think, at the end of the season. In Singapore, I believe, was when the AlphaTauri this year brought in the Red Bull rear suspension. And they brought a new floor as well. So they made a few changes this year, AlphaTauri, that pushed them towards the Red Bull direction. And what do you know? They went from being basically the worst car at the start of the season to a legitimate middle-of-the-pack team. So now you'd imagine that they've got an entire few months in winter break to build a brand new car entirely around the Red Bull design from the ground up. Like, they're going to come up with a good car. Like, it's not going to be a slug. Surely not. So I think if I'm Mercedes, McLaren, Aston, Ferrari, or whatever, like, sure, you've got to try and look ahead. You're trying to look to Red Bull and try and catch them. But you've also kind of got to look behind in some ways, because I think some of these teams are going to be looking at their back and thinking, well, damn, AlphaTauri might be coming different at the start of the next season, such as Aston Martin did this most recent year. A few of those teams, of course, are appearing here in the most positions gained of the season. So Verstappen actually was still somehow had 42 positions to gain over the year. It seems crazy that he had that many to even make up. But Perez, this is the funny thing, right? Qualify poorly in a great car and then overtake people in the race and get driver of the day. This is the Sergio Perez strat. Lance Stroll was second here, then Zhou and Sargent. So this isn't necessarily overtakes made. I don't think it's more like positions gained. So if somebody crashes out, if there's, somebody retires, then I guess that's technically a position gain. So probably that's what this includes, to be honest. I just wanted to mention this because I saw this image floating around of what we used to have a few years ago now, when there was the Hypersoft, the Ultrasoft, the Supersoft, the soft, medium, hard, and then, of course, all the other tires as well. Nowadays, probably it's better for the audience just having the soft, medium, hard, so that maybe a more casual viewer can just say, oh, it's the soft, medium, or the hard. But the reality is, of course, that on some weekends, the soft tyre is the hard tyre from the previous weekends, because they're using C1 to C5, or technically C0, but they don't use that one, C1 to C5 compounds, which is kind of like what we had before. But, what they used to do is just choose of this selection so you can have the different colors. They changed their mind on that, but I know that many people look back on this and they kind of, idolize the Hypersoft and the Ultrasoft and these awesome tires from back then that we don't necessarily have anymore. We still kind of have the compounds. Obviously, they're different. The tires are different. The tires are bigger than they used to be, but I think a lot of fans would probably be in favor, maybe, of bringing back the compounds such as this. But, for various reasons, Pirelli and Formula One don't seem particularly keen. But very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.